Hello. Hi, everybody. So welcome for an edition of live Rideshare Rodeo, which for years on the podcast has been called Gig Tank Live. For those of you who don't listen to the audio podcast, we do have gone live sometimes. We call it Gig Tank Live. And I'm really excited to have Karen Anderson here today to kind of round out all the collection of amazing people I've had on the subject. But Karen, thank you for being on.
Steve, thank you for having me. I've been listening to some of your more recent podcasts, and they've been very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. A little bit before we started, guys, just so you know, we were discussing the interview with Vina, and obviously I didn't want to get too far into that because that's going to be part of our discussion here today. But I see a lot of people popping in the room too. I want to say hi to Gary Middleton, hi to Kim Kavin, hi to Gail Gordon. Who else is in here? Dasher Pass, ODD Mac. Glad to see that you guys are making it. And you guys, this is my first live stream, so I'm trying to keep up with the comments here for the three platforms. Mac, thank you for telling me that it is working on Twitter. That is awesome. So I guess, Karen, can we start a little bit with why you are so brought into AB5? I mean, like everybody else you were, but why you started the group, how the group has become so good. And I'm talking about her Facebook group here. It's a large group of very good people. I mean, you have a good sized group in there.
We do. We have almost 19,000 members.
Right.
I started it right after AB5 was signed into law in November of 2019. Actually, the law itself was passed in September. And it was, I knew that it was an existential threat to my career, but then I started reading up about it, and I realized that there was all sorts of other crazy careers that were going to be caught up in it as well, such as golf caddies, nurse practitioners, interpreters, musicians. We were just reading all these crazy stories. So I started this Facebook group to see if I could get people to come into the group and share their stories with me. And within a month, stories started coming in of people losing their livelihoods and their careers and their contracts with their clients overnight, even before the law went into effect in January of 2020. And the first big group of people that were sharing their stories were musicians, interpreters and translators, of course, writers and journalists, photographers, videographers, wedding planners. I mean, it was insane, the amount of stories that were coming through. And this was even before it went into effect on January 1st, 2020. And then, of course, in January, then all hell broke loose. And I was getting stories that you couldn't even believe.
So I was on board with it long before that. Like when Gail and I did our second interview, just back a little bit, it was almost a year. It was early November of 2020. But even I have to go back 2 years. I forgot how long it is. 2 years now. About that same time, like around August of 2019, I got turned on to AB5, and I'm in Colorado, but I keep my hand in that game, and I want to know what's going on and follow up, because I knew that Colorado even had been a state looked at, along with these other ones that are trying copycat bills and things of that nature. So I was trying to get in with all this. And when after I met Gail, I remember her telling me that they, it seemed like a wave of people were getting told about this AB5, and like the first wave was small, and they were like, oh, that won't affect me. And then it was like, oh, that won't affect me. And then all of a sudden, all these people were realizing this is going to affect me. And then it did.
Oh,
but I think I felt like it was very under the radar. I felt like it was kept so much that it was hard to get anybody to believe in it before it happened.
Well, what happened is the precursor to AB5 was the Dynamics decision of 2018, when the California Supreme Court came up with this very antiquated, strict, onerous ABC test for classification, but it applied to wage orders only in this one case. And wage orders have to do with minimum wage and, breaks and overtime and that kind of thing. So AB5, the following year, well, people started that the ABC test got on people's radar right away, especially the truckers. The California Trucking Association filed suit very shortly after this dynamics decision. And then a year later, when the AB5 was passed, they amended their lawsuit to include AB5. But what AB5 did is Lorena Gonzalez, who is the author, sponsor of the bill, she's an assembly person in San Diego, a small district in District 80. They took that ABC test and they codified it into law, but they expanded it beyond the wage orders to include all the provisions of the labor code and the unemployment insurance code, which when you interviewed Vina Duval, she mentioned that. She was correct about that. They expanded it and therefore controlled the entire independent workforce. And so it applies to every single worker in every single business in California, unless you have an exemption or unless you have an exemption.
Right. But I mean, those exemptions have become so many. I mean, even you were pointing it out on Twitter the other day, how the movement on Twitter was so much bigger before, and now it's still some amazing people, but it's less because as people got carved out, they left the pack.
Well, that's the problem with the exemptions. It divides the opposition coalition. It even divides the coalitions of people within the same profession, like musicians were battling it with one another because some musicians got an exemption and other musicians did not. And that's the mythology of these exemptions. Unless you have a blanket exemption from AB5, which these, very moneyed professions had, like doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, dentists, veterinarians, real estate agents, they got blanket exemptions right off the top in the first iteration of the bill. But musicians, for example, when AB5 first went into effect, you had to, if you had a band, you had to make you as the band leader would have to put all of your band members on payroll and turn them into employees, even if you had just the one-off sitting in with you for a night. So that was a complete dumpster fire right off the bat. And all these exemptions, I mean, there might be 100 or so that have come into it, within the first year, but a lot of them come with caveats and fine print and hoops.
Well, I was just going to say,
cannot take advantage of the exemption.
Right, and I was just going to say, while you were on music, it's not like music got carved out. I mean, we got Gail Gordon in here, and I've had her on a couple times, and she would be happy to yell about her story again. I mean,
well, no, Gail,
it was classical musicians, other, they even dissected the music itself.
They did. They gave it.
You're going to be.
Exactly. So if you're a musician who performs for community theater or musical theater production or a theme park or amusement park or festivals of certain sizes or in an orchestra or in a symphony, you do not have an exemption. You have to be made an employee. So that is why in January of 2020, we started getting all these stories from community playhouses, children's theaters, opera companies like Gail's and other people. We have lots of opera people in our group, festivals, dance studios, you name it. They were all having to shutter their productions because they could not afford to convert every single person into an employee. It would raise the cost of a single production by something like $40,000.
Right.
So it was
more. Gail was breaking it down for us. I mean, the payroll part of hers would have, especially because of the super unique niche that she is, it would have just crushed her every time she tried to do one.
That's right.
I mean,
we have some members who tried to comply with AB5 as opera company, and she did everything she could, including spending her own $10,000 of her own money to try to pull off this one production while everybody on payroll. And it was such a nightmare that, even if it's just impossible. So when Vina Duval, when you interviewed her, she said, oh, well, Gail's getting bad advice from her attorneys and she just needs to restructure her opera so that, she can have independent contractors. Well, that's not true. It's right
and
there.
She specifically said S Corp or cooperative something.
Cooperatives.
Yeah, I mean, this is how she like, and yeah, I mean, Gail and I were kind of, when I had Gail on the last time, I got a little mad about that because I said to her, well, what about Gail in the opera house? I had that example ready. And when she came back around on it, she said, well, what about your friend with the opera thing? And I don't know why, but it drove me nuts. I was like, I said opera company or opera house. It's not an opera thing. Don't like.
Who watched that knows that Gail's opera house or opera company was founded in honor of her mother, who was a Holocaust survivor, and she puts on operas based on music from Holocaust survivors.
And and I've talked to her about this. Nobody else does it. And people listening, if you haven't heard Gail's other podcasts with me, Gail is a 501c3 nonprofit. And that's a whole nother category that I do not understand.
Well, before AB5 was passed, the night it was passed in the Senate in September, I think it was September 10th of 2019, there were 12 sets of amendments. One of them would have exempted nonprofits, but there are a whole bunch of them, to exempt interpreters and translators and musicians and licensed professionals and pharmacists, and they all just got tossed on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
And so the people that did end up getting an exemption, be it a rock solid exemption or a partial exemption, that's sort of like a leaky lifeboat, it's not going to keep you afloat for long. They still had to wait almost an entire year for this cleanup bill to pass in September of 2020, and it was called AB 2257. And so you had all these headlines saying, "Oh, freelancers are, the whole gig economy is musicians have all been exempted. Journalists have their exemption now." Well, it's just not true. These are partial.
Did you see this comment from Karen? It's from Gail. Karen still don't understand why nonprofits are not exempt.
Well, they don't. I mean, they're,
was that across the board though? I mean, was that?
It is. And there's a lot of really heartbreaking stories in my group, especially in the arts and nonprofit arts and after school programs and dance and even, even political campaigns and stuff like that. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of categories of professions that are completely left out in the cold. Lorena Gonzalez, who is the Lord and Master over the freelancers, she gets to decide who she wants to dole out an exemption to. So she's like the headmistress in an orphanage, handing out bowls of porridge to a chosen few. And usually those chosen few are the ones who have the loudest voices that are making her life miserable, or they have some kind of connection. And she wants to squelch the bad optics. So she tosses a few bones here and there. But right now, she's washed her hands of AB5. There's nothing more coming from her office in terms of larger groups that still need to be exempt from this law.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the Vina piece here a little bit. And because as we were talking about, and as I talked about with Kim and Gail, also, a lot of this was walked around, some of these questions, and I thought I had some good questions that needed an answer. I guess let's start with one of these. One of the questions that this is one I didn't get to with Vina, or if I did, it definitely did not get answered in any way. Is there a way to have the PROact for the people who want it and not for the people who don't?
No.
Okay. Straight up. Just no.
Straight up. And that question gets asked a lot too. Well, what if an independent contractor and the hiring entity, they both want to be, they like their arrangement, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have a contract. It doesn't matter if you call yourself an independent contractor. It doesn't matter if you have an LLC or an S corp. It doesn't matter. You have to comply with this law, and you have to meet. The hiring entity has to prove, the onus is on the hiring entity to prove that all three prongs of the ABC test are satisfied. Otherwise, that person, that service provider has to be made an employee. It doesn't force the hiring entity to hire them as an employee. 9 times out of 10, they'll just say, well, we've just terminated. We're not going to, we don't need your services anymore. So a lot of people just lost their longtime clients, you know?
Right. I know people who have left California for this reason, not just the other reasons that they're leaving California, but for AB5.
Yeah, but like having an LLC or an S corp does not exempt anyone from AB5, nor does it protect the hiring entity who's hiring that LLC from misclassification violations.
Which is something Vina said.
Well, that's not true.
I mean, I think you heard it too. You know,
we have examples in our group. Lots of people, lots of small business owners who get audited, and they had an occasional independent contractor who had a videographer or web designer or somebody who had an S corp or an LLC, and somebody may mistakenly applied for unemployment insurance or whatever that triggered an audit, and the EDD came down on them and fined them and everything else. And that's the problem with AB5, is that the fines for misclassification and penalties are very, very serious. $5,000 to $25,000 per violation, $10,000 for a fine for not providing workers' comp, and then you have all the back pay, benefits, and back taxes that you would have owed that worker had they been an employee. And some of it is retroactive by 3 years, and then of course you have the attorney fees on top of that. So it's enough to put a small business out of business. So I get calls from moms and pops and one person owned businesses who are getting audited right now as we speak, and all throughout the pandemic, for the crime of having a videographer or having a platform that connected referees and umpires with schools or florists, or I can name a whole host of people. You just can't even believe it. And a lot of times it just puts them out of business. So they're not just going after these big Uber and Lyft companies. They're going after mom and pops and one-person businesses. And during the pandemic, Lorena Gonzalez, and I think Vina Duval as well, were enticing people on Twitter. If you're an independent contractor, go and sign up for unemployment insurance, even though you're not eligible, because then if we find you're misclassified, then we'll get you more money. And Absolutely. So it's a big trap.
So I put up on the screen, I want to shout out hello to Bryce Bennett. By the way, Karen, Bryce is the CEO and founder of Solo up in Seattle. They're a gig company that's doing work where they can take your platforms and they can make sure you're earning the most. And if you don't, it's only in Seattle right now, guys, so don't get excited. But if you don't, they'll pay the difference. If they tell you to work, it's just different platforms. So it's a really cool project. But this is Bryce's question that I put up on the screen.
Well, Prop 22 passed by 60% of the vote in the last election, and it exempts rideshare and delivery only. App-based rideshare and delivery. The headlines are very misleading about it. A lot of headlines say it exempted the entire gig economy. Of course, it does not exempt the entire gig economy. There's still tons of, the gig economy encompasses a whole ton of different types of platforms, everything from domestic workers to janitorial to tech to all. It only exempts rideshare, app-based rideshare and delivery only. Well, recently a judge in Alameda County ruled Prop 22 unconstitutional for some technical reasons. So they're going to continue. They're appealing it, and it's really hard to predict. If the technicality is valid enough to overturn the will of the voters.
So I got to ask you about this, because I know you have lawyers in the group as well too.
Yes.
I know you have some very good lawyers in your group.
We do.
Okay, so we know that the state of California has attorneys. We know that the companies behind Prop 22 have mass attorneys: DoorDash, Instacart, Uber. I mean, these are companies that have hundreds of thousands of attorneys. I mean, they can just keep throwing them at you. How did everybody miss the fact that that Prop 22 was breaking the California Constitution?
Well, it remains to be seen if it is. These people are resentful.
But the fact that it's even one judge to say, yep, it is. I mean, how if it isn't, then why is this even a thing?
Could be an activist judge. We don't know. I mean, they feel strongly that they're not going to. It takes. I think it's a high bar to overrule the will of the people on an invalid initiative.
I was going to say, especially after you spent that whole, like, what was it? Whatever. You corrected me the other day. I put like February, and you're like, no, it was March. but that's just the way Karen is, guys. She's like, I told somebody today you were faster than Google with answers.
But, I mean, my motto is, in order to fight the fuckery, you have to be armed with facts. And so, like you said, there's all these attorneys, spouting stuff, and some of them get it wrong.
Yeah.
A lot of the reporters don't have. I mean, it's a very complicated.
I was going to say, I don't think most people, even attorneys, I don't think. I mean, an attorney will take on your case just as soon as you show them the money.
Well, Vina Dubois, your show said this blew my mind. She said that physicians are exempt from AB5 because they have high wages. High wages don't exempt anybody from AB5. We have a ton of people in our group who are six-figure earners and licensed professionals and people with doctorate degrees and highly skilled career professionals who are not exempt from AB5. It has how much money you earn, your income, has nothing to do with an exemption.
I mean, and plus that, I mean, it goes against everything she says. She wants everybody to be making sure everybody's earning.
But back to your
wait a minute. But if you're rich, you should have been exempted.
That's right.
Come on, man.
That's it. Yeah, and if it's worker protection, like they say they are, how come there's a whole bevy of people who have, or professions who have, connections in Sacramento who are therefore exempted from these so-called very important worker protections? It doesn't. None of it adds up. So,
no.
But
and I mean,
question about Uber and Lyft. The chief legal officer for Uber is Kamala Harris's brother, Tony West.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. And the whole Prop 22 thing is kind of crazy to me because I'm just going to step for 1 second outside the boundary because here's a story that really upset me about Uber. And it just happened. They were asked by California to pay $59 million to rape assistance and attacks on drivers and passengers and all this. And the story was, hey, you need to pay us this. It got spun into Uber paid $9 million and just said, hey, we'll pay you $9 million, shut up. They paid $9 million, the thing went away, and Uber spun it as a positive for themselves. Like, we are giving $9 million to the community. And I know that a lot of people see only those stories. They don't see the deeper dive stories behind them that make more sense of that $9 million. Because $9 million is a lot of dollars, but not really when we're talking about what we're talking about.
Well, when Prop 22, the months leading up to the November 2020 election, when Prop 22 was being voted on in California, there was this whole shock and awe campaign from all of these different enforcement agencies in California, from the labor commissioner to district attorneys to city attorneys to the actual attorney general of the state of California, all filing injunctions and lawsuits against Uber, DoorDash, and all the rest. And it put them up. It was such brinkmanship. It put them right up to the edge. And people in California were realizing, oh, Uber and Lyft are threatening to leave the state during the middle of a pandemic when we
that's what we were talking about with the date. Yeah.
Hustle. We don't.
But they wait, and it was funny because they literally, I was following it that day even really hard, and they waited till like the 11th hour. I mean, they were
actually October 13th was the date of the hearing.
Okay.
And if they had lost it that here, but they added a stay until, because it was going to be voted on. But I think that their approach, the state of California and their litigious approach backfired on them because people were realizing, oh, we don't want to live with, we don't want to lose our Uber and our Lyft during a pandemic.
I've said it on the podcast that the infrastructures of cities have got so into bed with Uber, a Lyft a little bit, but so much with Uber that they can't, it would be like closing buses down.
Yeah.
There are now people reliant on Uber to get to work, to do this, that, the other. And I know you could say, well, they did it before, they can do it again. No, there are bus routes have closed, things have changed, mapping sequences, all kinds of stuff. And now there are people who just rely on rideshare to get somewhere. And they've done, free rides to vaccines or to testing or this or that, again, getting them in with the city. So they're so in bed with every city that to think that, Uber's just going to go down is kind of ridiculous.
Well, another thing that Vina Duval they were very worried about this passing. So leading up with the Prop 22 Yes campaign, they just focused on the independent contractors in their own industry. They didn't speak at all about AB5. They didn't mention other, industries or talk about AB5 as to how awful it is for everybody, because their initiative just had to do with them. But Vina and Labor started their own campaign saying that Uber and Lyft were creating all of us freelancers were coming from Uber and Lyft and harassing people like Vina Duval and Lorena Gonzalez. And that's when we started, it was just insane. There was an article written by this labor writer for CNET on behalf of Vina Duval. I think that she was behind that hit piece. And there was another hit piece in the New York Times against our freelancer movement that actually named people that on Twitter and my group, Freelancers Against AB5. And it was just like, what is going on?
And some weird stuff happened on Twitter. For those of you who weren't around, Lorena Gonzalez has 2 Twitter accounts. And they're both, different pictures by a little bit. They're both pictures of her, and I think she's in a red dress in both even. So it's like they're close. And then they both kind of a close title, close enough. But the handle's a little different. But one of them is a certified government account. And she is not to be blocking people with that account. But she has.
Well, she has another account, and she's blocked.
Well, I know that. She can do whatever she wants with the other account. I don't care.
But she uses her account for official business. It's just wrong, and she blocked me. I'll tell you, and I've always been, I have rules of engagement in my group. If you look at my group rules,
I did.
And Lorena,
I'm in your group now, and I did. I wanted to make sure I didn't offend anybody.
I've always had a rule saying you cannot cross the line with, vulgarity and dehumanizing comments directed to Lorena Gonzalez. You just can't. I'm not going to allow it in my group. Right. You can call her every other name in the book and be critical of her policies. But, I have always, I try to conduct this whole thing professionally. Well, she blocked me for tweeting a link to an article that I wrote about her rotten AB5 law in the Orange County Register. I can share it with you if you want.
Yeah, I've read so much that it's crazy to me that she blocks, though. I mean, because here's the thing. She's now seeking, is it Attorney General? Do I see she's moved down a notch to wanting another position now?
No, this is what happened leading up to the 2020 election. She was running. She launched a campaign for Secretary of State. That's
what it was. Yeah, but now I've seen something resurfacing here.
Well, what happened was when Kamala Harris and when Biden and Kamala Harris won, her Senate seat was vacated, and so Newsom appointed the then Secretary of State Alex Padilla to take Harris's Senate seat. And so Lorena had always launched her campaign, but instead of choosing her, Newsom chose another assemblywoman from San Diego named Shirley Weber and put her in as Secretary of State. So I'm assuming that Lorena Gonzalez felt betrayed by that. I don't know the woman, but we thought, wow, that's pretty major. But recently, the California Labor Federation voted that they someday want her to be their leader when their current director retires, and his name is Art Pulaski or something like that. So
it's like a future promise for all the bidding she did for the devil in the unions.
Yeah, but AB5 was sponsored by the California Labor Federation. She already works for them.
Right, I know.
Her power on their behalf, where she's at right now, especially because she's the head of the appropriations committee. So she's a very powerful person, even though she comes from a very small district. And
But I wonder if she'll remain now with all the damage AB5's done. I wonder if she's going to remain like she was on, like, I'll put it this way. I don't agree with it, but she was on her way up the ladder. I think we can both say that. She was taking money and giving money to the right people. She was getting in bed with the right people. She was doing the things that get you up that dirtbag ladder of politics.
Her campaign, she got $1 million in contributions from special interests and big labor for her 2020 campaign. Really? And none of it, only a handful of like maybe 5 individual contributions. That's what I was told. But no, she's not going to be put out to pasture. Big labor's not going to allow that. She's been there, the tip of their spear. And so whatever she is married to Nathan Fletcher, who's a supervisor in San Diego, and he is also bringing this back to trucking. He serves on the CARB, California Air Resources Board. They're the ones that are coming up with these emission standards for truckers. So not only does AB5 put them out of business, but these emission standards, I mean, it's just one thing after another being forced onto the independent owner-operator truckers in California. So they're like this power couple. And I've always thought, oh, they probably have their sights on higher office. But, she's labor. She's backed by labor. AB5 was sponsored by the California Labor Federation. And in fact, before it was voted on, there was a exemption application request form circulating around the Capitol in Sacramento that had AFL-CIO letterhead on it. So you tell me who wrote AB5. It's all the union-backed state agencies, lawyers, those kinds of people combined their forces with Lorena Gonzalez and her staff to create this Frankenstein monster, which is AB5.
Yeah, every one of the 75 lawyers I looked into that drafted AB5 were all basically might as well have been leading unions.
But I like to tell the people in my group that, focusing our ire on Lorena Gonzalez takes the onus off of every other freaking assembly person and state senator that voted for it and still support it. There's not one single incumbent Democrat in the state of California that has come out against AB5, not one. And so if you want to fight this law, you have to keep at your own representatives and let them know, and they were hearing all the stories all along that were being exposed on my page. But they can't. They got to go with the constituents. I get what's happening, but are there constituents that into AB5? Because there was it was a 3 million vote win for Prop 22 even. Well, and I know that's a little different, but I'm just saying, like, people recognized, listen, we can't have everything destroyed, people. AB5 it's very convoluted because a lot of people in California don't understand what it is. They think if they've heard about it, they only think it's about Uber and Lyft, or now they might think it's about trucking. They heard that there were these exemptions and they saw these headlines. And then the Prop 22, they're reading that it exempts the entire gig economy, which it doesn't. And then the pandemic came along and obscured all the collateral damage that would have been exposed to the general public, with all the fallout that I see and I'm exposing daily on my page. So that there's just this information gap with the general public. It's very hard to explain AB5 to somebody who doesn't know about it in less than 15 minutes, and they don't think it applies to them. But, the fact of the matter is that AB5 affects all sorts of, there's a ripple effect that will affect all sorts of people, from the deaf and hard of hearing who don't have access to sign language interpreters who've always been independent contractors, to rape victims who don't have access to forensic nurses. I have a woman who is a forensic nurse that told me a horrible story about how AB5 is impacting their profession, because it's all archived in my group. I've collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories across hundreds and hundreds of categories of professions. And AB5 disproportionately affects seniors. It disproportionately affects stay-at-home moms, people with disabilities, the chronically ill. Oh, shit. The chronically ill, people like seniors, for example, who were thriving with their self-employment opportunities for so long.
I just had one up on the screen, in fact, that I was going to ask you, how would you respond to this person?
Well, I don't know why he was turned down for a pandemic unemployment assistance, but he's right. That's Roger. Hi, Roger. He's in our group, and there's so many seniors that just lost it all. And a big example of that would be transcriptionists. I can't tell you, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of transcriptionists and court reporters and people like that in our group who lost their careers overnight and never got them back. And the freelance transcription profession in California is basically extinct. They have not given them a pathway to an exemption. And a lot of people who do transcription work remotely online are seniors. And they think, oh, our company's going to hire somebody in their 60s like Roger? You know, there's ageism involved in AB5, and those are really heartbreaking stories. I had a story in my group of a woman who was doing remote bookkeeping and transcription type of work so that she could take care of her husband that had stage 4 cancer and their autistic son. And she lost everything overnight because of this law. And so her only solution was to put her whole family in a U-Haul and move to Florida. And this is how the state of California is treating Californians. And they don't want to listen to us. They don't want to hear our AB5 stories.
So what about the recent news of, I mean, you know, we haven't seen it printed like a headline, but it should be, because PROact looks like, right now anyway, we're out of the woods for a minute. Am I wrong in saying that? Because I think that too much bad has happened, and I'm not going to point fingers at administrations or people or anything. I'm not going to try and get political here, but I'm just going to say that so much has gone wrong that steam and momentum that they had for maybe getting the PROact through seems to be a little more out of reach.
Well, we have to stay very vigilant about it. The PROact,
I fully agree, but I just want to mark up the slight win. It was there one. Do you see that?
Not officially. It's stuck in the Senate. It's not been voted on in the Senate because they don't have the votes, and the only way to get that would be to eliminate the filibuster or whatever. But there's portions of the PROact that they are deploying into other bills, and that's why we have to keep vigilant. So right now, there are some things from the PROact that are in this Build Back Better. One of them being $100,000 fine for unfair labor practices, which could just basically put a small business out of business. So they would be allowed to ramp that up. Now, whether that's going to make it into the final iteration of the bill, we don't know. But this ABC test is what you have to be on the lookout for. And there's a bill that Kim Kavin, by the way, shout out. She's in New Jersey, and she's been fighting the good fight. She is the tip of the spear on the fight against the PROact amongst freelancers. And anyways,
for those of you who didn't listen to the Kim Kavin episode, we did go back and listen to it, because she's definitely got a fire under her in that one, and she was spot on. It was great.
She does. The ABC test is this very malignant sort of thing that it can be deployed into either the Department of Labor rules, or it can they can somehow manage to insert it into the National Labor Relations Act, so that or it could show up in a bill about unemployment insurance, that you can't qualify for it unless you can pass this ABC test or whatever. So you have to be on the lookout for it. And it's not to say that the PROact is dead, but it's definitely lurking out there. And provisions of it are like, I liken it to, the ABC test is like a invasive species, like a rancher, like in Hawaii on the on the mountain of Mauna Kea, they planted this stuff called gorse, and it's like barbed wire. And they say, oh, it's going to just contain this one area to keep the cattle in. Well, no, it's not going to be contained to this one bill or this one thing. It's going to spread and metastasize because they want to squelch the trajectory of the independent workforce. And the easiest, quickest way to do that is to deploy the most strictest employment classification test in the nation, which is the ABC test from California.
Right. And I know other states already have the ABC in place. Not as many as Vina said on the podcast, but I do know even Kim said there are other states that have the ABC test already there.
There are, but they're not the same. Most of them have a B prong that's more flexible. You know, the B prong in California, you can't be in the usual course of business in order to be an independent contractor with the hiring agency. You know, it's a very difficult bar to pass. That B prong is multi-pronged in other states, or the ABC test might apply just to unemployment insurance or very small wage orders. The only other ABC test that might be equally or nearly as onerous as the ABC test in California is in Massachusetts. But there's only a handful. I think there's less than 22.
You're talking about H1, 2, 3, 4?
ABC test.
Oh, I meant the House bill that's trying to go through.
No, I'm talking about on the state level.
Okay. But that's what they would use, right? I mean, that's what would be behind H1, 2, 3, 4 is using that ABC.
Yeah, we don't want the ABC test anywhere near anything. It's just, look at the disaster that's happened in California. I mean, I've
sat down with so many people and we've played with every industry. Could this pass it? Could this pass it? Nothing can pass it.
Well,
I think we came up with plumbers. I don't remember how. We came up with some, but it was difficult.
A plumber, they like to use that example. A plumber who's hired by a department store to come in and fix a sink can pass the ABC test because he's not part of their core business and he has his own business or whatever. But
he's doing the same duties.
As well, yeah. I mean, there's just the ABC test is very problematic. And that's why there's so many exemptions.
Right.
In my group, we've identified over 600 categories of professions, just in my group alone, that have been adversely impacted in one way or another by AB5 and the ABC test. And so these exemptions that she's throwing out for people, they come with it. It's like, just because you're named in an exemption, like if you're a tutor, for example, you can only get that exemption through the referral agency category of exemptions, which has 11 prongs that have to be met. And for all practical purposes, most tutoring companies can't meet that. So, when they say there's 100 professions exempted from AB5, a lot of them are partial exemptions, and many of them cannot take advantage of the exemption at all. So with the PROact,
part of that was to break apart those groups
for anybody.
Do you think part of that was to break apart those groups and their unity? And
I think that was a result for sure, but I think most of it is because it's just such a poorly written. It's a scorched earth approach to policymaking, where you burn down the entire village and then you pick through the rubble of the people that have the loudest voices shouting, help, help, I need an exemption. And to squelch the bad optics, you toss an exemption out here or there. But if you have the loudest voices got some kind of exemption. But some of the reasons that these exemptions are so hard to pass, they give with one hand, but they take away with another, because they really don't want you to pass it. They want people. The AB5 always defers to converting people to employees, which is the original intent of the law.
So this is a person I know who does gig work here. What do you think about this question here? While I'm looking at my Vina notes for just a second.
Contractors, when things got busy, in-house tech could keep up with demand. How would that work now? You have to, the hiring entity has to hire a employment law attorney and spend big bucks to examine every aspect of the contracting relationship to see if it's in compliance with the law. And 9 times out of 10, it's not. And sometimes what we're hearing in California is that a lot of the employment law attorneys are just advising their clients, just don't even touch an independent contractor from California with a 10-foot pole, whether they have an exemption or not, because there's too many landmines.
I mean, we heard this time and time again when it was, that even people who were in the very beginning, when no writers had been taken care of or exempted yet, if they were writing for the Chicago Tribune and the Miami Herald and the New York Times, but they lived in California, those companies didn't want to have anything to do with them. As Lisa Rothstein put it when I had her on, she said, we all became toxic in overnight.
That's right.
Nobody wanted to touch us, even people that knew us forever. And it wasn't just based on the law. It was more of an answer like, we don't know what happens if we touch you. We just know there's some real bad stuff behind it. So,
well, the original version of AB5, she imposed a 35 cap on journalists, 35 cap on submissions, which was completely arbitrary and totally ridiculous, and totally, it showed how little she knew about the writing profession and where it in the new media in a digital world. And so, a 35 submission could be a 100-word blog post, or it could be a 5,000-word article. Right. Either way, it's unconstitutional. So a cleanup bill, she finally removed that stupid cap
in the AB 2257.
Yeah, but she inserted a new caveat that said the independent contractor cannot replace an employee doing the same work at the same volume. So when I talk to employment law attorneys in my group, I said, if you're risk averse and they're conservative, they're not going, that caveat alone would give them pause and say, oh, well, that doesn't necessarily give you the green light to hire an independent contractor. So she gave with one hand and she took away with the other. And that's AB5 and AB 2257. The cleanup bill is filled with all sorts of poison pills and devious little things that just screw you in the end.
Again, this is Gary Middleton Technologies. He makes apps for us gig workers that create filters. So like if you're working Uber or you're working DoorDash, you can set parameters so that like, I don't want to take trips this far. It helps you dial in your earnings. He's pretty amazing. His stuff's really some top-notch software out there. A lot of gig workers use it. Here's another question he is asking now.
Temp jobs for AB5. That's a good question. It really depends on the agency. I have examples in my group of a woman that got audited. She hired a one-off for an event that she was doing, who worked only for her for like 5 hours. She never even talked to the woman, but she made the mistake of signing her check. And that person, I guess, was a professional, go after the hiring entity, file a lawsuit kind of a person, and dragged her through court. And even though that the worker was from a temp agency, she got fined and penalized, and it cost her business for one temp worker. And
yeah, I was gonna say, what is the fine again?
Well, the fine now could be anywhere between $5,000 to $25,000 per violation. It really
per violation.
Yeah, for willful misclassification, but mostly the EDD, they fine you for back pay, back benefits, back taxes by 3 years. I mean, there's just the audit horror stories in my group are the things that are really the rude awakening, because they're not just going after independent contractors, they're going after small businesses and medium-sized businesses, and they're in the crosshairs and they have a target on their back. And this law can put you out of business if you don't watch your back. And now what's happening because of the pandemic, so many people have filed for unemployment mistakenly and citing their client these independent contractors citing their client as their employer mistakenly, which triggers an automatic audit. And then you have these people just freaking out going, I've done everything. I've crossed every T and dotted every I, and I'm getting audited, and it's going to cost me an arm and a leg. And I thought I was doing everything right. And it's pure insanity. And the enforcement entities out there for this are city attorneys, district attorneys, the labor commissioner, the EDD, state agencies. They can all work together to go after a single business or a single entity. If they think in your city, if there's a bunch of, car washes that they think are mistreating their workers, they'll audit every single car wash.
So does that relate to this Roger that you know and what his statement here is?
I can't answer about California
too loaded.
And how they handled the pandemic unemployment assistance. All I know is that it's been a complete and total mess. And there were, I think they $30 billion distributed and to fraudulent claims, unemployment insurance and pandemic unemployment assistance, because the EDD is so incompetent. And
right. And mismanagement of money and cyber attacks.
And blamed independent contractors for that.
So this is a good question here from Marissa Edens, because I know the answer to this, you know the answer to this, and I feel like too many people don't, especially outside of California, because how I was saying, a lot of people didn't see this wave coming in California until it was boom, wait, this law does affect me? And all of a sudden now, so here's this question. This is what I get a lot from people is that, well, AB5 is about California. I don't live there. I'm like, man, wake up, because you have legislation somewhere in your pipeline coming down.
Well, that's right. This is a trend.
Many states, anyway. Many states.
Well, you can thank the incompetency, the dumpster fire of AB5 for being somewhat of a firewall for this to spread rapidly and metastasize the way they think they thought it would. But yes, I mean, that's the trend, and you have to pay very close attention to your own state legislature and what they're up to, because labor, they want these. They want to squelch the independent contracting. They do. So you have to always be on the lookout. Yes. And Prop 22, when Prop 22 passed, that was somewhat of a firewall, because if that had not passed, you would have seen a lot more action in other states against rideshare and the gig economy, for sure.
Right. But I mean, yeah, it's just ridiculous. I mean, like, how much of this is, again, a friend of ours. So how much of AB5 is being copied to the PROact? Well, basically, Karen already mentioned the biggest problem is the ABC test. Yeah, so it almost doesn't even matter what it is. It's how they're going to classify you.
Yeah. The ABC test in the PROact would be inserted into the National Labor Relations Act for the purposes of organizing. And so they say, well, this isn't going to automatically, make independent contractors lose their clients. But that's not really true, because once something becomes, embedded into federal law, then it sets a precedent for states and courts to use that, in rulings and lawmaking and everything else. The ABC test is like cancer. It's like a melanoma. You don't want to see it being used in any which way. The ABC test from California.
Right. Well, but I know that, I mean, for whatever reason, I mean, I know that Kim, I have here up on everybody in the that's watching on any platform too, just in your head, give Kim a big hand, because she took down New Jersey pretty much single-handedly, even though I know she didn't, but I know she was huge in it. So Kim, kudos to you for getting in everybody's face. Kim's awesome. But so yeah. Kim knew that was coming to Jersey. We thought what is it that went to New York? And now we've got H1, 2, 3, 4 in Massachusetts. These states are looking at the model of AB5 and going, that looks good. We'll take that.
I don't know how they could come to that conclusion.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
You know,
how can you look at the model so far of this and go, that's working well?
if the PROact had passed, who would they have appointed as the czar of the exemption process? They would have promoted the failures in California like they always do, and they would have promoted Lorena Gonzalez. Oh, she knows what she's doing.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but back to trucking. Trucking is what I think people need to really keep their eye on now. That in California, there's 70,000 owner-operator truckers, you know, and they have been under the dark cloud of AB5 potentially, you know, throwing them out of business since the law went into effect. But there's been a preliminary injunction in place against the enforcement while they fight it in the courts. And now, finally, the Ninth Circuit in April reversed that injunction, and now they have to take it to the Supreme Court. So they're waiting to hear if the Supreme Court is going to hear their case or not. And there was a good sign a couple weeks ago that they may, because the Supreme Court sent the case to the U.S. Solicitor General to review because they want to get her opinion on it. So, but if they don't hear it or they lose at that level, then you talk about a supply chain problem and a shortage of truckers. I read there's 13,000 independent owner-operator truckers that serve the ports in Los Angeles and Long Beach. You know, and they're fighting it because they say that AB5 is preempted by federal law, specifically the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act, which says that states cannot enact laws that impact the prices, routes, and services of motor carriers. So they're fighting it very specifically. And people say, well, why can't they fight it to repeal it for everybody? It's because they're fighting a very specific aspect of how they feel that they should be exempt. The franchise industry has filed a lawsuit against AB5 because they don't pass the ABC test. There's 76,000 franchises in California, imagine. You know,
fast food
have a lawsuit against AB5. The journalists still have their lawsuit out because there's still restrictions on journalists in terms of videography and working for TV and broadcast and stuff like that. There's still there's a lot of journalists that are still screwed by AB5. You know, there's some, you know, and the litigation is going to continue and continue and continue because it's such a poorly written law.
So here was a question I had for Vina that I did not get to. So I'm going to ask it to you. She never even got to hear this because we ran out of time. But what do you say to the people who consider themselves high-paid professionals, consultants, and subject matter experts who have created their own businesses selling their expertise? And then a little more to that, the B prong of the ABC test precludes them working independently in the industry in which they have established their expertise.
Well, all of that, what you just read, is true. I mean, and it bears out in our group. These career professionals, people, we have a pharmacist in our group that has a doctorate degree, and she lost her career overnight. She hasn't gotten it back. In the healthcare industry, licensed professionals like, you know, nurse practitioners are not exempt, respiratory therapists, nurse anesthetists, people with highly degreed, highly skilled career professionals, and six-figure earners and people like that have lost their businesses because of AB5. And Vina Duval, she responded to you, I believe, in a question similar to that, saying, oh, all the hysteria is because they're getting bad advice from their employment law attorneys.
She even said it specifically about Gail. I was holding in anger at that point.
And then she said, oh, it's a Prop 22 campaign made all of the independent contractors and other industries think that it applied to them, and that they were, you know, they were doling out bad information about AB5 as it pertains to all the other professions. No, they weren't. They didn't even, I followed their campaign very closely. They didn't even mention AB5 as it pertains to other professionals.
Correct. So here's my follow-up that I had for her on, I don't know how she would have answered that. That was another thing. I almost was glad that we didn't get to that one, because with the way it was going, I don't know how she was going to go around it, but I felt she was. But here was the follow-up. How does their working independently undermine the quote unquote protections for quote unquote exploited workers?
I'd like to hear her answer that question. How does it?
Me too. I mean, I would really like to know that, because that's the first question is one that both you and I were like, well, this is what? The answer is simple. But that follow-up question is a big deal.
Well, I watched a town hall or forum, I guess, a webinar that she did with Lorna Gonzalez and another writer from the New York Times, and she was making these claims. Let's see. I have this written down, actually. She was saying that so many journalists are exploited, freelance journalists. Not in my group.
Well, it's I mean, I saw somebody in here say, okay, it's one of our friends from Idaho who does rideshare. I'm going back to it. It's right here. This is Drive to Win 13. His name is Jason. He lives in Boise. He's saying, hey, Steve, after traveling all over and doing gig work, I have never met a single real gig worker who wants AB5. He's been doing this about as long as I have. And what he did during the pandemic was kind of unique. You can't do it with rideshare, but with the delivery platforms, he was working all of them. You can go to any state in the country and work. You don't have to stay in your state. So what he did was travel around and teach other people how to do this, get them signed up under his number. Hopefully they got the amounts done and got him some extra cash. But he was moving around in an RV with his Prius on trailer and then driving around these cities in Prius. And when he was in California, same thing as me. I have never, ever, ever, outside of the AB5 group itself, talked to a true gig worker who said, yeah, I want AB5.
Well, when you say gig worker,
on-demand app-based platform gig workers.
Right.
I know that steps outside a little bit of what we're talking about here, but at the same time, it's the same feeling on both our parts.
Well, let me just read to you some of the professions, categories of professions in my group that are impacted by AB5. Casting assistants, children's theaters. We have a Grammy award-winning mariachi band that was nearly put out of business because of AB5. Court reporters, florists, funeral officiants, guitar makers, lactation consultants, genealogists, dental technicians, auctioneers, physical therapists, genealogists, massage therapists, notary publics. Real estate appraisers, for example, were not given an exemption in the first version of AB5, which was ridiculous because they're supposed to be independent, right? They finally got an exemption in the 2257. But in my group, we had real estate appraisers that lost their accounts and their gigs because of this stupid law. Paralegals, process servers, radio engineers, rehab specialists, sheep shearers, videographers, virtual assistants. And then, like I said, we have 600 different categories of professions. Professional Santas.
Yes. Yeah,
and Santa Jerry, who's in our group, it hasn't gotten the supposed exemption that they gave performing artists. It didn't help the professional Santas. We have entire sectors in California that have been decimated by AB5. One of them being community theater, for sure. No question about it.
I don't think we have to talk about that. Gail's in the room, and Gail's a good friend of mine. And
independent filmmaking, independent health professionals, meetings and conventions, the wedding industry, the event industry. Family caregivers are really hard hit by AB5 because if you're taking care of a loved one who's sick or an elderly parent or whatever, and you want to be there with them 24/7, but still work at home from home, AB5 took that all away. And it disproportionately affected Californians during the pandemic when everything was locked down. I mean, you couldn't come up with a law that was more onerous in the face of a lockdown, where Californians were applying for remote work, be it transcribing or tutoring or whatever it was, or interpreting, translation, bookkeeping, virtual assistants, all of these different things that you can do online. Californians were completely aced out of it. And if you apply for those kinds of jobs from California, or jobs, I don't want to say jobs, assignments, that you'll usually say we don't work with people in California. So Californians in general are discriminated against, because if you're a California-based business, you can go outside of California and hire your independent remote contractor. So Californians are actually losing work to people from out of state, from clients that are based in state.
Right. I mean,
if you're an out-of-state business, you can't hire an independent contractor from California without, ensuring that you meet the requirements of AB5.
Here's another one from Marissa that kind of relates to what you're talking about here. She's here in Colorado, but I do accounting for many small businesses in Colorado. Most work exclusively with ICs for project-based jobs. AB5 would put them out of business.
Yeah, and another thing is that a lot of this stuff needs to be looked over by an employment law attorney. So if you're a hiring entity and you're using independent contractors, even if you think you're in the clear and you can pass it, you best protect yourself by having your contracting relationships looked at very closely. And even if, like I said, even if you do pass the ABC test, or you have an exemption that allows you to bypass the ABC test, you could still have a target on your back with an audit. All your independent contractor would have to do would be to complain about you if they're disgruntled, or inadvertently file for unemployment insurance, and that would then your business, your little florist company, or your little videography company would get audited. And it would cost you, just in attorney fees to defend yourself would be enough to make you want to quit your business.
Yeah, I mean, here's another one from the person in your group, just naming more things too. Telecom, audio, visual tech, sound, video engineers, IT techs. I don't know which one specifically he's talking about. He must just be saying union to non-union, because there's tons of these people out there still, but
none of those are exempt from AB5. There's this kind of little wiggle room for this. There's this like single engagement live event exemption of some sort. But again, AB5 is such a landmine that, you just never know. A lot of people in California don't even know that AB5 applies to them. They don't even know.
Right.
I mean,
yeah. I mean, if you're a freelancer, even like whatever your self-employment status is, you better really check yourself. Like when I told Vina my story in the very beginning about the jobs I work, some outside of traditional gig economy, some, it was really kind of scary, her answer. She's like, well, and it was in the beginning, and right away she started kind of going around stuff. I'm like, that was a very direct question. I just asked you, if I have all these jobs, how in your world do I work? How does this keep working?
Well, according to her and Lorena Gonzalez, you're cobbling together jobs, and you should be able to you shouldn't have to do that. You shouldn't be allowed to, have a side hustle. You should have a full-time job that gives you
communism
and takes care of it.
Let's just skip the middle ground and go right to communism.
That's right.
I mean, that's what it is. That's not slowly moving into a socialist community even. That's just like, let's jump socialism and go right to communism.
Well, a lot of these little gigs are stepping stones to actual careers. Me personally, as a writer, an editor, and a photographer, if it wasn't for independent contracting, I never would have risen up the ladder to become a managing editor of a publication, or to write a book that was published. I mean, it's opportunities, and Gail spoke to that too. When you're in a mid-tier opera company or whatever, you can't this gives you a leg up to getting to honing your craft, and it's just so sad. It's so, if Californians knew that the community arts in their local communities were being taken away from them because of AB5, they wouldn't stand for it. But the
That's part of what blows me away. Of all the states, I would think California would really get up in arms about this, because they love the fact of these Gale type theaters and these things. People find these niches and love them, and they love that their state has them. Well, they don't anymore. You don't have them anymore.
Well, and then it's just the law picks winners and losers, and it's so obvious when you're following it. Like just recently, for example, the Los Angeles Times railed against Prop 22. They were so against it, but at the same time, they were lobbying behind the scenes to get an extension on an exemption for their own delivery newspaper carriers. So they successfully got a 3-year exemption, temporary, but out of both sides of their mouths, they don't want rideshare to have an exemption.
Right.
And their delivery drivers work 7 days a week. They actually don't even pass the traditional Borello test that's been in place in California since 1989. And yet they got an exemption.
Right. And that brings me to, I know we're winding down on time here. I have to ask you 2 more questions at the very least. One of which is I've asked everybody, and I just need to know your answer. I get the same from the people that I know, but if you have anything behind it too. How many jobs has AB5 created?
I mean, a smattering, possibly. Jobs? What's a job?
I don't know.
A full-time job?
I'm asking you to see how you answer.
Is it somebody who's working part-time or seasonally, or somebody that they,
created?
I don't know. I
had Gail on and she said 0. And I've actually heard that from other people too. I'm trying to find where there was some, because there must have been some.
We have examples in our group of somebody that was so afraid of having his independent, even though his independent contractor passed everything and was perfectly legal. He's so afraid of the labor laws in California that he converted his worker into his independent contractor into an employee. But that doesn't mean that employee is going to be making more money. More often than not, you're going to be you're going to lose income if you're used to setting your own rates and you have your own business and you can charge what you want and you can pick and choose your clients and everything. If all of a sudden you're forced to be an employee, or you accept a job as an employee, it's very possible you're not going to be making all that much money. And that is true of adjunct professors. Adjunct professors are some of the lowest paid people in anywhere.
So yeah, so that it brings me to what, to one thing that, I've been in the service industry forever, bartending, serving, managing, everything. And I did it for many, many years. Those people are paid a different minimum wage. Like, a server, when I was, this is 10 years plus ago, a server made $213 an hour. A bartender made $285 an hour. Because if you get a day shift and it sucks, and if you're all day shifts, maybe you'll make a little money off that, but usually your tips are going to cancel out your money, so you're not really going to even get a paycheck. If you're working at a place that has good volume, you're making good money. Your tips will outweigh it, and your paycheck will read 0.
Right.
You work 80 hours, you'll get a $0 W-2 paycheck. So there's nothing in place like that for people who are going to, it's like that, at least I'm not, it's a different system, but at least it was thought through. AB5 was just like, all of you can't work.
Yeah, like I said, it's scorched earth. It's monster. It's pieced together. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And, as far as work, we have an example of a dance studio. All of her independent contractor dance teachers, they didn't want to be converted into employees. They wanted to remain independent contractors. And she couldn't have them as independent contractors anymore. So what she had to do in order to pay them what they were used to getting paid, or somewhere close to it, was to eliminate half of them, maybe, but a lot of them just left. They said, I'm not going to be anybody's employee, and they were getting paid less when all was said and done because of all the payroll, costs that are incurred when you convert somebody to an employee. It's going to raise the cost.
Oh my gosh.
By 30%.
Yeah. Employee taxes and payroll can kill a business that's even doing well. I mean, it can. And I'm not saying that, you should try and loophole around it, but when there are ways and when you can do it yourself as the IC or whatever, and not have to have those employments, that can save you. I mean, I don't know. It drives me nuts. But so here's the newest question I have. So this is happening right now, and it's kind of very odd to me. After all of the money, and DoorDash was one of the big monies behind Prop 22. It was Uber, and then I believe DoorDash was second, and then Instacart, and then Lyft. And how much they threw into that 210 million to fight Prop 22 or to pass Prop 22. Now DoorDash is in New York moving into the employee model as of this week.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, I don't know that you know the answer to this, but I'm looking to see if you know why they would be doing that, because I know that the floor payment is the floor payment in New York happened about a year before AB5 went into law and Prop 22 went into place.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells me that the New York plan is failing big.
I don't know how to answer that question because I don't know enough about the particulars of New York in terms of how their DoorDash, operate and what their labor laws are in terms of them being an independent contractor. But certainly, I mean, Uber and Lyft just have a monkey on their back, and DoorDash, period. They just
I am just blown away that they're going to move to this model. I mean, the logistics of a on-demand app-based company having to either move to a franchise model or to have small service areas where only so many can sign on at a time, and then who's reliable. I always have said this since the start, outside of like the freelancers and all the people that you talk to every day, in the gig economy, I always told people, if you want AB5, you just, I mean, I would put it nicer, but it means you don't want to work. Well, because they're sitting at home with the app on, cherry picking the orders they want, and they're like, well, I'll just make money per hour sitting at home. No, you won't. You'll be fired the first time you skip a job they send you.
Well, and they'll probably reduce the amount of drivers that are out on the road available to people, and it's really gonna, I mean, it would be really harmful to rural areas and places where there's not.
It would be hard everywhere.
Yeah,
and people would be getting fired everywhere. I mean, if they move to a franchise model, I'll tell you, people, first of all, you don't have your job. And I used to make a joke about the fact of the people who wanted AB5 are the last people the franchisers are going to hire. They're be like, you did this. I don't like you. Get out.
That's right. And I don't know, rideshare, it's a whole topic unto itself. It really is.
I know.
And people have different opinions about the business model, but with Prop 22, they kind of carved out a third classification, if you will, that's not based on the binary decision of either independent contractor or employee. So with Prop 22, they are guaranteed 120% a minimum wage. They have access to stipends for healthcare and different other little perks. And we have a 73-year-old woman in our group who drives for Lyft, and she comes in and tells us how great it is and how much money she makes, and she's really happy with Prop 22 and everything that's happening. But from my perspective as the founder or the administrator of Freelancers Against AB5, we're looking at this across the vast swath of professions that are all caught up in this. And people might ask, well, is it an unintended consequences? And I say, no, it's not. It's not just, sure, there's dolphins caught in the tuna net that they didn't, anticipate. But they knew that this was going to control, they want to control the entire independent workforce for purposes of unionizing and making these people, getting these people employed as a W-2 employees, and then putting them into unions, because unions are, their underfunded pension plans are almost like a Ponzi scheme, and they need younger members. They need to increase their membership with younger members to cover their older members and their retirees and everything like that. So these sectors like rideshare and trucking, it's like low-hanging fruit for them, or so they think. But the litigation continues. They just keep fighting it.
Yeah, and I mean, so everybody in every state, if you're trying to figure out which states we've been talking about that it could be coming to next, don't worry about that. Look into your own state, because it might be coming there too. You really don't know. You don't, I mean, like we were talking about today, I was even surprised to learn from Karen today that not a single person is behind getting rid of this thing.
Well,
I mean, the people we need to be, you know what I mean?
Elected officials. No, they're not. They're dug in because they have union backing, and public and private sector unions are what run Sacramento. So they don't want to step out of line with it. And you would think
they've dropped off, unions have dropped off so much in their participation levels and their funding and all this. Initially, do you believe in any way that this initially was made to go after the gig economy and then they realized, make a bigger net, let's get everybody?
Well, initially, like I said, it derived from the dynamics decision of 2018 in the California Supreme Court.
I understand. I'm just saying, when they started seeing how many they could gather.
I think that they see that the trajectory of the independent workforce exceeding traditional work, the traditional workplace, and they want to squelch that. And so they see these larger industries like domestic work and janitorial and app-based rideshare, and also tech and trucking, and as these big sectors as opportunities for them to corral as many W-2 employees as they can in order to increase their union membership. And so the idea that it's about worker protection is belied by the fact that they've exempted people like pool cleaners and moving companies and people that hang pictures or dog walkers from these important exemptions that are supposed to protect them. Right. So it's all just a ruse. And another thing that she did, she sold this, and I investigated this, and in fact, I wrote an article. It's already got like 18,000, over 17,000 views. She was selling AB5, Lorena Gonzalez. She peddled it based on false data. She was going around saying that the state of California loses $7 billion a year in lost payroll tax revenue because of independent contractors. And so the Berkeley Research Group, they thought, that's really weird. Let's do a study about that. And they did a deep dive. They called every single agency that she quoted as saying that that's where that number came from, including the Labor Commissioner and everything. Nobody has any idea where that number came from. It doesn't exist because it's false. So
I will put all of the links you give me, and hopefully like that article, let's put that one in there, and any others you think people should read, whether it be traditional gig work or on-demand gig-based platform work. Let's not separate them, because those two need to come together to fight these laws.
Right.
I mean, as much as they are separate things, the Prop 22 isn't really saving you. I've talked to people who are like, it's a nice little crutch, but it's not doing anything.
Well, the Uber and Lyft, they had a choice in the beginning. They could have funded a ballot initiative that repealed AB5 altogether for everybody, but they chose to go the route that they went, which was Prop 22, that focused just on them. And in a way, they're no different than any other industry fighting it in the courts, and spending a lot of money. They want their exemption and their carve out, and they have specific reasons for that. Repealing AB5 as a whole is going to take a ballot initiative. but it's
I guess my point being that even in California, where they did, oh my gosh, all the app, like when you guys are like, all the app-based people got the carve out, they did, but as always, the promises aren't being lived up to. It's partial of what they said. It's twisting arms to get what you were told. It's so many hoops and so much BS that they're learning, hey, what we were told we didn't get. And this isn't really working, and what the heck. So it is time for everybody to come together, because it needs to be all of these people to overturn this stupid dumpster fire law.
What I'd like to see is the franchise industry, the trucking, independent owner operator truckers, the app-based ride share, and any other industry, including, specific professions, come together, and business associations and everything else come together to fund a ballot initiative to repeal AB5 and also undo the dynamics decision, because that is the root, one of the roots of the problem. You have to pull it out by the root. So you'd have to address the dynamics decision as well. Now they've had Assemblyman Kevin Kiley has had many attempts on repealing AB5 in the legislature. I wrote a letter and gathered 8,000 signatures that he distributed last year to every assembly person on the floor when he was trying to get a motion passed to repeal AB5, and he handed it to Lorena Gonzalez, and she just, according to Kevin, he told me personally, she just tossed it across the desk and cursed at him. Get this away from me. And it was signed by 8,000 freelancers. This is how dismissive.
I loved Kim's stories. She was so detailed in all those. They were great.
I know.
I mean, I could like see the room when she was telling those stories.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm here, they're here, this happened. And I was like, this is crazy.
They're just a very dismissive attitude, and they want it to go away. They think that the legislators think that the problem's been solved, and like I said, you have to be armed with facts to fight the fuckery. And so you have somebody like Lorena Gonzalez, who's on the Appropriations Committee, and if she's in a hearing and she's talking about an exemption or what's going on with this with the bill, she can run circles, she thinks, around somebody, because they're and they just defer to her, and she's, like I said, she's the Lord and Master over the freelancers, but she's washed her hands. So really, people focusing on her, you're really kind of deflecting our energy, because that lets everybody else off the hook that's behind this law and who voted for it.
Right. So let's focus on California for a minute as we close out here. What can people do? How can people find you? How do you best suggest for people to start who know about this now, and they're like, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? Where are these starting points to start meeting up?
The clearinghouse for all of the horror stories is in my group, Freelancers Against AB5, which is on Facebook. You really can't discuss the intricacies of AB5 on Twitter. I mean, you can blast it as being a shitty law. But when you want to do the deep dive, you kind of have to have these conversations, and people share their stories. So in my group, we have an archive of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories as to how they affect a specific profession. You can come in and post a question, and somebody in my group from that profession might come and explain what they're going through, be it a photographer or a wedding planner or a nurse practitioner, whomever, or an architectural renderer or a videographer. And then we also have, the most important thing is to raise awareness, because we're battling the information gap. Like I said, is our biggest obstacle. People don't understand the law. They don't know what it's about. They think the problem's been solved for most freelancers. The pandemic has obscured it. Or maybe it's only about Uber and Lyft, or the whole gig economy in California was exempted by Prop 22, which it wasn't. So there's all this confusion, and the legislatures get to hide behind that. And if you walk down the street in California, or into a grocery store, and you approach somebody and ask them what they know about AB5, 9 times out of 10 they won't know.
No, I mean it is scary. However, enough people voted for Prop 22, which was letting the gig workers off of AB5. So, I mean, you should have, unless you're not paying any attention or reading what you're signing or voting for. Should have noticed that one.
Yeah, but like I said, they, Californians didn't want to lose their ride share. It push came to shove, and there was a lot of brinksmanship going on right to the very end.
Yeah, still
but
now.
As far as if it's, who's happy with it and who's not, our group isn't. We have people who do ride share in our group, but it's not focused on.
No, I've already been in there, and I've seen some really great threads that I like to read. The type of people who listen to the podcast are often gig workers like me who have other traditional gigs too.
Yeah.
So maybe they're a freelance writer, but they do DoorDash 15 hours a week.
A lot of people.
That kind of combination would come together very well in your room. I don't know. We need to build up the groups like yours to even bigger numbers, even though what an accomplishment, 19,000 is a ton.
We do. We've come to a certain sort of impasse almost in terms of getting the word out, because even the reporters that write about AB5, they'll usually just hone in on one particular profession, and they don't write about the vast collateral damage across the vast swath of professions. They just don't take that approach. I've been interviewed by lots of people, from the San Francisco Chronicle to the Wall Street Journal even, and it's really hard to get them to focus on the big picture. And our group is really the only place anywhere that exposes the big picture collateral damage of AB5. And I spend every day just shaking my head going, wow, it's great to have AB5 highlighted, for example, in the trucking issue at this moment. But there's so much misinformation being spewed, even in the main media about trucking and AB5. The truckers have not, there's not been a ban yet imposed on them because they've had an injunction this entire time. But if they have a dark cloud hanging over their head, and the AB5 was kind of the last straw for some of these truckers, and they said, I'm just getting the hell out of Dodge. And some motor carriers and freight carriers said, well, we're just going to preemptively not work with independent owner operators. That was way back in the beginning, but independent owner operated truckers have been able to operate as independent contractors in California because of there's litigation in place that's allowing them to do that, but it's temporary.
But even I know some truckers in California, and actually, I think I was telling you this, every Friday I do a 2-hour call-in show on TNC radio out of Houston. Mm-hmm. And the other, every hour out of the week, except for those 2 hours on Friday, it's a trucking radio station where they break down the highways, the weather, what's going on, trucking news, this, that, the other. And then they have me on for Rideshare Nation to do a call-in show, because a lot of the truckers do gig work on the side.
Well, the truckers were really, before AB5 was passed in September of 2019, the truckers were really out in force against it. They were the big group that were there driving their trucks around Lorena Gonzalez's office down in San Diego, and tooting their horns up in Sacramento, and really, really making a ruckus about it, And so like I said, the problem with exemptions, even the temporary ones, is that it takes people out of the game. It takes people out of the fight. I mean, they're like, oh, okay, I can breathe easy now. Like how we started this conversation in the beginning was, where are all the people from the early days of AB5 that were hundreds of people fighting AB5 on Twitter? Well, a lot of them got their exemptions and they disappeared as predicted.
Right. And that's just sad. So I'm going to put all of the links in there, but again, is there, for the people who aren't on Facebook, because I honestly do know a decent amount who have religiously signed away from Facebook.
Yeah.
Is there a website too that pulls in these archives? Or
well,
I know Kim has her website. I know, but
my archives are shareable via a Bubble Up website app. So they are on an online platform. The stories, the ABC, I can share. Like,
is there would there be like a way for me to share it on Uber Lyft drivers?
Absolutely, it's something that you can share on Twitter. You can share. It's just a link, and it takes you directly to the thing. I can share the screen right now if you want.
Okay.
It's let's see.
If you do a share right now, it should come out.
So do you see it?
There we go.
So this is my archives that I've been collecting all these stories, and you can see, and it's shareable via this link.
Oh, the link goes to this page.
Right. And so you can scroll
Okay.
through, and they're all in alphabetical order. So you can see like auctioneers, actors, adjunct faculty, after school programs, animal shelter. And these are all, I mean, there's a ton of different stories. Like
I know that I looked at these the one time when Kim was doing her thing. Can you post it in the, I know that for some reason StreamYard doesn't let you put into the comments, but can you put it in the private chat and then I'll pin it to the top of this?
Sure.
The link.
And here's like, this is just the outline view of it. And you can see every single one of these categories of professions are from my group, and there's between 1 and sometimes 10
I just counted like 15 Ds.
Yeah, fly fishing guides. We had somebody come in about that.
No, I'm just looking, and like you went through the letter D, there was like 15. Like,
I mean, forensic nurses was a really horrible story. Patients who have been sexually assaulted will suffer long wait times and may receive substandard for forensic medical exams if provided by untrained medical personnel in an emergency department. It is not feasible for many hospitals to have a forensic nurse on duty 24/7, so they contract with us and they come in when needed. I mean, that's an example of how AB5 is detrimental to rape victims, and it's just unconscionable. There's so many unconscionable stories in this archives that will just completely.
And this was just that one subfolder that you clicked in.
Yeah, that was just one folder.
So the other list is the link. Yeah, you should give me the link and I'll post it here. I'll also put it in the show notes, but I'll put it up here so that people who watch it after this will see it pinned to the top of the notes.
Yeah, and then I have another. Can you see this?
The list.
This is a list of
chiropractors, casting.
Collected of professions within my group, members of my group that have been harmed in some way, even if they've since received an exemption, they've been harmed in some way by AB5. And there's 600 categories of professions.
Right. I mean, right here, I'm looking at big ones: casting assistants, casting directors, caterers,
drag queen performers,
chiropractors.
Yes.
Choirs. Is that chronically ill?
Yep. The chronically ill are very impacted by AB5.
Christmas carolers. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Churches.
And so
comedian. I mean, we're already in a woke society now. Comedians can't work either because of, geez, this law.
Is why this
is junk. Is junk.
Blocked. Can you see this article here?
No, I know.
Even with exemptions.
Here, I remove that one. If you put it back up. All I had was the other one up.
Oh, okay. Let me put this one up. Oh, wait. Share screen.
Yeah.
Chrome tab. Okay. This is the one that got me blocked by Lorena Gonzalez. I wrote this. Even with exemptions, AB5 is still rotten to the core. And it kind of just covers why it's just such a,
Is this a new article or is this an older one?
Last year.
Okay. Because I was just thinking, I think I've seen this before. I think I've read this.
Yeah.
I just didn't notice it was you.
So anyways, that's...
But yeah, I mean, like this, I would love to get this kind of stuff up. I love putting it up when the guests are here. But yeah, I don't know if, were you able to put if you put those two over in private chat, I'll just put them in the chat because the chat replays on replay, so
Okay,
that people can watch it and see it.
let me.
And so just before I shut this down, I want to make sure I get it in there so that people can find that.
Okay, private chat. Should I put it right here?
Yeah, you can just paste it in. I'll just paste it into the comments.
And then here is my my rotten to the core, which gets shared by various groups every single day. This article gets tweeted out by various groups. It's amazing. And then here is the professions harmed by AB5.
Might as well put the Facebook group too.
And then here is my Facebook group.
And guys, if you are on Facebook, I know a lot of you are on other
It's
platforms, and
you can go and look at it if you want to participate.
right. But I'm just saying this isn't. Those of us in at least the on-demand economy have encountered a lot of bad people in groups and getting yelled at and doing the wrong thing. And this is a really cool group. I mean, don't go in there and be a jerk, but it's not a bunch of junk. There's solid. Everything I read was solid. It wasn't like anybody talking about their day or flowers, or it was all information.
Yeah, I try to keep it newsworthy and factual. You know, I don't let it get off on a vent or a tangent or hyper political Democrats versus Republicans. We have, we want to. There's enough to dislike about the law itself, and I really try not to let it spin out of control, and it doesn't really. We address a lot of topics of the day, and every single day there seems to be just something else that you just shake your head going, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse with AB5, here comes another story.
So, okay, we really are on our way out here, and I just want to ask you, is there a chance? I mean, there's always a chance, but is there a big enough movement pushing to have the entire AB5 repealed in November? Is there a chance of getting this on the ballot and getting this thing?
Not this November. It takes so much backing. I would hope that by 2024 we could do it.
You don't even think of some seats switch because of country mismanagement, to say the least? And I'm not pegging myself as either side. I always stay in the middle lane, but you don't think that that's even going to shake it up enough to say, like, guys, what the heck?
Well, in 2020, the election of 2020, here in California, not a single pro AB5 incumbent lost their seat. In fact,
but that was a weird year because, well, I think we all know. I mean, that was, Joe Biden. I'm not putting my foot down in any camp, but we all know Joe Biden had the most votes of any president of all time. Yeah. I'm sorry, guys. It's not being Democrat, Republican, Independent. It's not anything about that. But no, he didn't. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't get the votes, but he got the votes for the wrong reason. It was anybody but that guy thing. It wasn't about Joe.
Well, in California, there were some congressional seats that flipped to Republican. But in the state assembly, what people need to realize is that your state assembly, or that your legislature, I don't know what they call it in other states, but in California, we have assembly and state senate. They have the most power over your daily lives than Joe Biden has. They're the ones that can make these laws that raise your property taxes, that raise your gas taxes, that destroy your business. They're the ones that make the labor laws. And so that's who you vote for in your own little jurisdiction is very, very important. And, and a lot of people, they vote for somebody that has name recognition or has the most yard signs or whatever, or has a D after their name. And
I don't think that people realize that you actually, because they try and I think want it this way, but I don't think that they actually realize you can really push to get a meeting with your local people.
You can, but
maybe you don't, but you can make enough noise where it's a problem with even a small group.
You can, and that was, I mean, it was a complete, I mean, people, when AB5 first passed, there was a massive amount of people contacting their representatives and complaining about it. But the unions in California and Sacramento are so powerful, you know. And
but they are in Jersey too.
And Lorena Gonzalez was making promises about, okay, well, we're going to clean it up and we're going to fix it and this and that. She's like Dr. Frankenstein. It's all just this weird little, you know, it's a dumpster fire, and it continues to be a dumpster fire. It's convoluted. It's very poorly written. A lot of it was going to have to be litigated because there's a lot of ambiguity in it. A lot of people don't understand. Like, for example, Gail was saying, well, opera isn't a musical theater production because because they gave a definition of what a musical theater production is. You know, so technically you could probably litigate that in front of a judge. You know, the definition. What is the definition of a musical?
I can't even imagine the amount of lawsuits that will be popping up here as the pandemic passes more, and if things don't start taking some turns. I mean, there's going to be lawyers, I would think, lined up. You have a bunch in your group, you should know. I mean, I would think that they're like, just their teeth are ready to sink in.
One would think. There's so many ways to skin a cat, and AB5 has, like I said, with trucking, the trucking lawsuit is very specific to that sector. They couldn't do a full repeal for everybody. They believe that that AB5 preempts them is preempted by federal law. You know, so they are specifically focused on how federal law impacts motor carriers. So, you know, their lawsuit would have nothing to do with anybody else other than trucking. And people get upset about that. They're like, why do they get an exemption and I don't? Well, that's why this law is it's so horrible. It picks winners and losers, and people just get left out in the cold. And if you don't have the money to fight it, or you don't have the clout in the Capitol, or you don't have a loud voice, you just get left out in the cold, like all the senior transcriptionists that just lost their jobs or lost their clients and their platforms and will never get them back. They don't have the representation.
I like this comment by Kim that I have up on the screen too. And state and local officials do not know how to handle bad publicity. I mean, I agree with you. And it's funny because you're basically saying that once they're federal, they've advanced to the Premier League, and now they do know how to handle it a little bit better. You know, it's like, but the state and local ones are the ones who need to. Well, you know, they're the ones coming in who are, I believe in stuff. Well, before you break, start believing in it then, and just put your foot down out of the gate. You know,
I organized a bunch of freelancers to join a town hall with the state senator that's just up in Laguna Beach, from just a voice from me. And we peppered her with 150 questions about AB5, and she ignored every single one of them. She didn't answer one of them. And she sits on the appropriations committee with Lorena Gonzalez, Cody Petrie Norris. So yeah, you can it's really good to make a stink, and I can't, and like Kim is saying, you can't underestimate enough. I mean, overestimate. What am I trying to say? Pro-action with your representatives, getting meetings, writing op-eds, and that kind of thing is so important. We had that momentum, you know. We had people coming together in my group that were putting together professional PSAs that were getting broadcast on YouTube and stuff. And
that's why I have to wonder if some of the carve-outs started happening because of that. This group's getting so big. Start carving out things that didn't even ask. I don't know. Carve that out. It's a big group.
Well, when the gigging musicians got their exemption, their partial exemption, because they really, you know, if you have a band, now you don't have to make them your employee, your band members your employee, but you're still restricted. You can't perform at the same venue more than once a week, or you have to be made an employee. So It's not a blanket exemption for bands. And
what if you're a band that has 7 different names and you play every night?
if the check could be written to the same guy,
Like, like just add the day to the end of your band's name. Like if your band's name's like, Fire, just call it Fire Monday, Fire Tuesday,
well, it's up
Wednesday.
It's up to the venue. The venue's the one that's going to get hit with the penalties, right? But it's stupid. Think about it. You could perform at the local brewery 4 Saturdays a month, but you wouldn't be allowed to perform a Friday and a Saturday once a month, because that's how the law is written. And so when people say musicians got an exemption, you point that out to them and they go, well, that sounds stupid. And you're mentioning churches. Well, like a nonprofit church, they could have their pianist or their choir come in once a week on a Sunday, and they could remain independent contractors as long as they're just performing there once a week. But during the holidays, if you have a holiday production and then you have a Christmas and this and that and the other, you would not be allowed to have those people be independent contractors at your church if they're performing more than once a week, and that would include rehearsal time. So that's why this law is so messed up. And it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, these exemptions that got all the headlines, and people think, oh, we don't have to worry, we got an exemption. Well, actually, no, you didn't. You got a partial exemption.
Right, and even if you did, I mean, don't let your guard down. You gotta remember the state that did this to you before the exemption. Keep your guard up.
Definitely.
It's not like, hey, we're off, we're good. This state still did this to you and then decided, maybe we'll carve you out. Like, they still did it to you, so there's nothing to stop them from going, you know what, forget the carve-outs. You're all back in that basket of AB5.
Heartbreaking stories in my groups were from healthcare professionals who could no longer go to the home of the elderly person who had just recovered from a stroke, or the, I mean, it's just
that kind of stuff. I mean, it all makes me sick with this junk law, but that makes me sick. The healthcare, the Gales, nonprofits. Come on.
Arts. There was a gal that had a platform in San Diego that connected umpires and referees with schools and sports leagues, and she got audited. And, umpires and referees have always been independent contractors, and she even set up her company with the help of 2 lawyers, employment law attorneys. And so they dragged her through the mud through the pandemic. And then all of a sudden, at the last minute, at the 11th hour, Lorena Gonzalez gave umpires and referees a blanket exemption in her cleanup bill. But it was too late for the woman with the platform, because the audit had already put her the fuck out of business because of the lawyer fees. And these are the kinds of stories that come into my group.
Well, I've kept you way over, and I thank everybody for coming in. I mean, no, I am so happy to have done, and I feel very honored to have had all the people that I did too. I mean, I know that even like you and I talking beforehand, like everybody's still pretty amazed. Like, how'd you get Vina on? I think some people think I had to like almost like I was playing the game. Like, oh yeah, I'm in a union. Come on in.
Well, she accused me of libel.
I don't know. We just had an understanding. She knew I didn't want that. I was never rude, and I know that a lot of you weren't. But there was I think there was a lot of fear in her from a lot of you, like Kim and you and Lisa. She just didn't want that in her realm. Me, I wasn't really that kind of threat.
The AB5 stories. She's an ideologue. She's focused on rideshare. She's a shill for AB5, even though she didn't even know. I listened to an interview with her, and she didn't even know what the EDD stood for. It stands for Employment Development Department. You would have a professor from Hastings.
I know what it is. I don't live in California.
Who specializes in labor law would know what EDD stood for. So I think that she's kind of focused on her own little world of rideshare and taxis to the.
It's the taxi thing with her.
The nasty details that are affecting all of us, because she might say, well, she hopes that the short-term pain inflicted across hundreds of industries will be worth the recentering of worker power. She tweeted that.
Well, and I've also heard from a lot of people. I'm not ever going to spread a rumor. However, I've heard from a lot of people that and I've never asked Vina this, but that her husband is pretty high up with Amazon.
I've heard that too.
And, I've seen her dog Amazon to the T with the Gatorade bottles that they have to pee in and stuff while working, and how bad the conditions are. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that would just add a whole nother layer too.
Well, she's a labor proponent. She's the go-to person when they're writing a labor story about exploited workers, and she's the one that they quote. As she may say that she didn't have anything to do with the writing of AB5, and I take her at her word for that. But she certainly has everything to do with advocating AB5 before, during, and after. But she doesn't know the fine details that all of us are dealing with because we're inflicted by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, like, even her gatherings and stuff, or the AB5 gatherings, the movements around all the different named chapters of things that the coalition for this, the this for that, the this and this and this and this, and all the things that strike that are around her. It's weird because they all get 7 or 8 people at these strikes. And I'm like, where are all these people who wanted this? You guys got 7 people in San Francisco. That's your main city.
Well, when with amendment bills, there was a bill called 806, I think, SB 806, that was tried to repeal and replace AB5, and it came up for a hearing, I think, and they just get on Lorena Gonzalez just gets on the phone and calls out the hounds, and she's got all these people from all these different labor unions calling in opposing the bill. They have boots on the ground, the unions, to fight any opposition. And in California, what I've learned that is really eye-opening is just how little representation the little guy has. We can't sit there. We can call in and oppose the bill, but we can't spend more than 5-10 seconds stating our name and stating yay and nay before they cut us off and send us out. We can't get in front of these people in the state legislature on this assembly floor or in a hearing and say exactly how this is affecting us. We have to approach our representatives in their offices, and these representatives who voted for it, they like I said, they are dug in. I don't know how they can justify it. It's a dumpster fire, but they continually vote against repealing it, and I don't know.
Yeah, I've seen. I mean, I know that there's people though, where I feel like once 1 or 2 join on, there's going to be others.
Yeah.
It's one of those. Nobody wants to be the first, but there have to be areas in California where the constituents of a guy, even though he might get more money from this, and this, and Joe Camel and the unions and the oil companies, he still has constituents to answer to, or she, whoever it is.
Well, it's very instructive to watch the recordings of the speeches on the floor before this vote was passed, before this bill was passed in the Senate. There was a Democrat, Glazer, I think he's up in Northern California, who did not like AB5, the bill whatsoever. He warned everybody about the pitfalls, and he voted for it anyways.
I mean, this is my friend Jason at the Gig Economy podcast, who, by the way, everybody, real quick, Jason has his 100th episode coming up next Wednesday. So to make sure to tune into that, it's going to be a really fun one. But he's saying a very common comment here. That stuff is so confusing at times, though. Well, yeah, I mean, Jason, we're talking about that, Karen and I right now. It's confusing. I mean, it's nobody understands. It's like it's not finished.
Well, that's the ABC test in AB5 is 74 words, and all of the exemption language and restrictions around it are like something like 4,000 words. So the law is just a convoluted mess, and you have to have even the attorneys, a lot of them don't understand certain aspects of it, including one of the prongs in the business to business exemption is very confusing when it comes to subcontracting, and it's just, they play with our lives like we're little paper dolls in a dollhouse, and they get around to changing their legislation or fixing it maybe a year later. And meanwhile, you've lost your career and you're never getting it back. And even if you got your exemption 9 months later, you already lost your clients and they're not coming back. And that's the story we heard over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, everybody, you do need to be on your guard. I posted links in the chat here, but I'm also going to post them into the show notes as well. Please visit her stuff if you're on Facebook or not or whatever, and I'll post the link on social that takes you to the archive pages, because I think that is a good page to even just start off at and read some of these horror stories. Go in there and pick the career that your parents or grandparents did. Maybe that'd be a fun way to start. Go to that link, find the careers that some of your family members have had.
How about babysitter?
Right. Okay, exactly.
Babysitter, an employee.
Or like Kim's saying, lawnmower.
Right.
Or lawn makers. Lawmakers. Lawmakers. I was like, what's a lawn maker? It's been a long day. I don't have my glasses on. So, but yeah, so I mean, like, go in there and find the careers that you can understand, that you've had family members who have had them. Maybe that's a great starting point, and read some of these horror stories, because they're not just, I lost my job. I mean, they're horrible. They are horror stories.
They really are.
I mean, you're not gonna find a lot of like beautiful before bed reading in there, people.
No, it crushes dreams, and it crushes the creative spirit. It's prohibition on creativity. The cottage
and
industry.
It's people who spent a lifetime building these businesses.
Lifetime.
And were wiped out in the course of, I mean, I know the pandemic didn't help anybody. Well, except for Pfizer and some other, I won't say anything, but I know that the pandemic didn't help anybody at all. But to throw AB5 in at the same time and just end these people's careers is just pure insanity and disgusting.
They couldn't even suspend it during the pandemic, just allow people to work. It was just horrific, all of it. People were really left out in the cold, especially people who lost their jobs, their actual W-2 jobs. Well, they're stuck at home during lockdown. Oh, I think I'll apply for a remote job doing, translating or tutoring or something. Nope, not if you're in California. I mean, it really, it was really, it was unbelievable, and it still is. And then you talk about healthcare workers, respiratory therapists.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Go in and look at this list, people. Go in and look at what's in there, and then you'll say, "Wow, this is in there." But then click it and open it and read some of those. I did it after the Kim one, because I didn't know it was that link. But everybody in here should now click that link too, because you posted that one then too. And it was weird, because you get in there and it's like you're expecting one story from somebody, but then it's these like just waterfall of stories.
And those are just the people that joined my group. There's so many other stories out there. Kevin Kiley compiled a bunch of AB5 stories. I have a link to, I think it was 345 termination letters that came into our group members from various platforms and clients. So I have screenshots of all of that, in the group. It's very eye-opening, and it is a disastrous law. It's a dumpster fire, and it just needs to be repealed.
Yeah, it does. Karen, thank you very much for being here. I think the more this content gets out, because I've even seen some of the people I know in here going, wait, this is I didn't know this. This is crazy. It goes this far. But, people need to keep hearing this, because, go to this link that I'm going to put up here for you people. Read about this, because this isn't even the ones I've enlightened into the law a little more. It isn't just a law that hurts some people. It destroyed lives and careers.
And life-threatening in some cases.
Yeah. And put non-AB5 and put W-2 employees at harm, because there aren't respiratory therapists.
Right.
Because they can't be ICs. This thing is, I hate to say it because I know you live there, but California is a joke.
Yeah.
The states always I've always had a good time in California. I've got a lot of friends out there, but I don't know what you guys are doing out there.
Well,
Not you, but what is going on, because it sure is not the California I remember.
well, you certainly wouldn't be having a Steve Jobs opening up, doing Apple in his garage with AB5 and the other labor laws hanging over his head. You wouldn't have.
No, he would. Well, he'd go to Texas too.
Festival, or I mean, California is the land of the golden opportunity where all these cottage industries and creative industries have birthed forth. And they're doing everything in their power now to squelch anything like that. It's just prohibition on creativity and innovation. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us. I know that some of you have popped in and out a little bit. I know we started a little bit early today, but that's just because it gets dark at like 2 p.m. We're living in the Alaska times right now. But Karen, thank you very much for.
It's still light outside.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I'm not. It's pitch dark here.
Oh, behind me.
Oh well, yeah. Well, no, I couldn't do that. But thank you again, Karen. Thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, and
I have to say, it's such a luxury to be able to have the opportunity to spend an hour and a half going over all the details about AB5, because it is such a vast topic and you just can't cover it in a 5-minute interview. And so for you to give me this opportunity to be able to, share a little bit with your viewers about what's really happening in the state of California around AB5 and independent contractors, it's really a privilege to be on your show, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Karen, and I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate all you guys. I was getting very into the AB5 thing, and then when I started talking to some people, I will tell you who really launched me into being hardcore about it was Gail. Once I met Gail, it was all over, because I love Gail. I think she's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think she's just one of the most genuine, kind people I know. And she gets through every day with a smile still, and does it all. And her world has been destroyed. It's just,
she and other opera company people joined my group right off the bat, and opera was one of those horror stories that we started learning about from Gail and Sylvia and other people right from the beginning. It's just really destroying. I mean, if these opera companies are complying with the law, it's destroying their companies.
Right.
It is.
I mean, yeah, this just has to end. So this won't end until everybody gets involved. So if you're in California, and I know some of you are by looking in the chat and some other things, make sure that you're, taking the time to sit down and tell other people that AB5 isn't just something that, oh, AB5, yeah, I know about that. Bye. Like, don't just let them walk away. Tell them, because it isn't hurting jobs. It is destroying lives. And that's a big, big difference.
It absolutely is.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And peace.